This is a video that I've had scripted for a little while, but I wanted to see how much I had lined up. So today is going to be the day where I crank out the majority of the videos that I had planned. And we're just going to go with the scripts as we know. So this will be part one, probably of a three-parter. This is just going to cover what I think right now is currently one of the weakest parts of the balancing around Diablo 4. And I say weakest just because it's a very lackluster effect that is provided. And that is discussing the key passives for each of the classes that I play. Now, I'm starting this conversation on a sorcerer. And I think that's very important. So when I talk about key passives are that one skill point that you spend at the end of the tree that, as it says, drive vital synergies through unique interactions. These are supposed to be like capstones that push your intended play style over the edge. Now, I have a little bit of a problem with the majority of the key passives in the game because they are not good enough. The only reason I run a key passive on every single character for the most part is because of the fact that they only cost 1 point, so they do make good filler perks. But let me just compare this. Now, they do not compare obviously to glyphs, because glyphs give you scalable bonuses. A Paragon glyph is obviously much better. However, if I were to compare these to even legendary glyphs, they do not compete the majority of the time. So ignoring my starter board, this is an Ice Sorceress right here. This is Frost skills deal increased damage to vulnerable enemies. This bonus is doubled if the enemy is frozen. So I deal 15% increased damage to vulnerable enemies and 30% bonus damage to vulnerable frozen enemies, which is quite common to do in most ice builds. This is a tangible benefit to me. This is something I will go out of my way to get as an Ice Sorceress. Now, this Pyromancy one right here, Pyromancy skills have a 10% increased critical strike chance and deal increased direct damage equal to 10% of your damage with fire bonus up to 30%. Now, if I'm playing a critical hit fire build, Fireball or Meteor, this is mandatory. This is very good, right? Similarly, if you look, there's a Burning Instinct. Burning damage is increased by 10% of your critical strike damage bonus, plus 1% for every 75 intelligence you have. Now, that means that if you have a lot of intelligence, you're only going to get 10% out of this, which means you need to have a high critical strike bonus, which is kind of counterintuitive with burning damage. But, you see how I'm explaining, most of these tend to be very good for the builds they're trying to play. However, big however, a majority of the key passives do not interact strong enough to really push me over the edge. Now, if I could run multiple key passives, that would be one thing. I think that would be a little bit broken, but I would like to see a class that could do that a little more. I'd like to see maybe a slower, bulkier melee class that hits super hard, but moves super slow, has no mobility, is like unaffected by crowd control, and has no mobility whatsoever. But they hit super hard, they're super slow, and they have tons of carrying power. Make them like a pack mule style character, right? Maybe you could have some of their features be like they get extra passives. Here's the thing. You're always fighting for your minor passives, as they are, the ones that you level individually, that can go up to rank 3, because there's plenty of things that I could have. If I could have extra skill points in this build right now, where would my extra skill points be going? Would I put them into extra mana? Probably not. Would I put them into potent? Probably not. Would I put them into elemental dominance? Depending on the build, I could definitely warrant that. Glass cannons, no. Conjuration Mastery, if I'm running that, I'd obviously load up on these. So specifically on Sorceress, looking at how they interact, what needs to be reworked? Now, the number one thing to me that needs to get reworked is overflowing energy. I actually think, because this is the thing, most ball lightning builds tend to build around crackling energy. Crackling energy is a very good way You can maintain crackling energy very easily through passives and other skills you're using, and you can use crackling energy to pick up mana, so you're constantly surrounding yourself in ball lightning. It makes ball lightning one of the most dangerous builds in the game. However, the problem with that build is that because ball lightning is a close range build, you're always running Virus Mastery. Virus Mastery, by the way, is okay. Close enemies take 15% increased damage from shock skills, and they deal 20% less damage, and if you get a critical strike, you increase these bonuses by 25% for 3 seconds. That doesn't increase that bonus to 25%, by the way. Let's be clear on that. That increases the bonus by 25%. So close enemies take 18.5% damage, increased damage from your shock skills, and they deal 24% or 25% less damage to you. I think it's 25%. Yeah, it's 25%. I'm stupid. Right? That's a good skill for ball lightning. Crackling energy builds are never running overflowing energy. Now, the idea on crackling energy is that, on the way this works, is that crackling energy hits enemies at additional times, so you get more damage out of it, and then every time that crackling energy hits an enemy, your shock skills cooldowns are reduced. So the synergy for this is that it gets unstable currents down faster, and it gets lightning spear down faster. It also technically gets teleport down faster, but you don't really have to pay too much attention to that. Here's kind of the thing. You can run Flicker Step and just generically be better than this. This, to me, should be reworked. Because crackling energy builds tend to use ball lightning. Ball lightning uses Virus Mastery. There's no build for the bouncing skills, right? Because look at what bounces. Spark bounces, Chain Lightning bounces, Charge Bolts can pierce, not really bounce. Lightning Spear bounces. Why is there no skill for each time Chain Lightning bounces, or Crackling Energy bounces, or Spark bounces, Lightning Spear bounces, etc.? What I would do is that lightning skills that bounce, or pierce have a 50% chance to overpower that hit if they have bounced off the same target twice. Now, this obviously is better for something like, say, Chain Lightning, but it also does help Lightning Spear a little bit too. There's no real good overpower part to the build. I think Fire has a little bit. Does Fire have an overpower in it? No, because they have Immobilize. There's no real overpower here, right? Most Ice tends to play around Vulnerable. Fire and Lightning both play around crits. There's no real overpower damage bucket. Why can't you have something for Lightning where, you know, your chance to overpower is increased each time something bounces? Overpowers are always fixed at 3% unless they're guaranteed. You could easily give something. I honestly think this is just the worst of the Lightning key passes. Avalanche, I think, is fine. Lucky Hit, Frost skills have 10% chance to make your next cast deal no mana and deal bonus damage. Chance gets doubled to 20% against vulnerable enemies. That's fine. That's really good. The downside is you're always going to run this if you're running any ice build, because you want Avalanche, you want those free casts. Versus if you look at it like Shatter, Shatter's just not great because after freeze expires, enemies explode for 25% of the damage you dealt to them while frozen. That could use a little bit of a rework, because it doesn't always work in scenarios where you freeze an enemy. For one, it doesn't really work against bosses, because it takes 10 million years to freeze them. The damage bonus to me isn't enough. Honestly, the easiest fix to the Shatter passive you could do would be to make it Ice Heart Breas. Basically, enemies that die while frozen have a 20, you could meet it in the middle, say 15% chance to unleash a Frost Nova on death. You could honestly make that into Shatter, and then you could change Ice Heart Breas into something that is much more frost-driven. That, to me, would fix a lot of problems. Because Shatter is on the weaker side of things. I still think that Overflowing Energy is the worst. Shatter is definitely on the weaker side of things. The fire ones are actually kind of okay. So burning effects deal 20% increased damage and an additional 2% per unique source of burning you have applied to an enemy. Now, there's multiple ways you can apply burn damage. I believe the most amount of burning you can apply is 6. There's 6 ways you could apply extra burning damage. So you could get an additional 12% burning damage per. I think burning damage is okay because you have Firebolt that has a burning effect on it. You have Incinerate, which has a burning effect on it. Fireball doesn't apply any burning damage whatsoever. It just deals bonus damage based off of burning, so I'm not going to count that. Flame Shield applies burning damage. I know Hydra can. Hydra can. Firewall can. Does Meteor. Meteor burns the ground. And then... So there's 7 ways you can apply burning damage, plus there's your passive. So this is okay in a burning damage build, although I do think burning damage builds kind of suck, but that's also me. I am eventually going to end up making a burning damage build, unfortunately. I'm not looking forward to that. But it's okay for what it does. Now that we have Isu's Ferocity, I think this could use a little bit of a rework. Basically, it's designed to buff the crit build. I wish there was a way. I mean, the easiest thing to me is to change and how this reworks is that your fire critical strike damage is increased by 10%. Each time a fire skill that you cast does not critically hit, this bonus is increased by 5% until you critically strike, and then the bonus resets. It's okay, but it's not great. I think the big one there in that Sorcerer's Tree that needs to get reworked is definitely the Energy, and then next I'd say Shatter. Those are the 2 big ones. Barbarian's actually going to be very quick to do. Barbarian does not need a lot of their key passives to get reworked at all. Like, their key passives are very good. They're one of the few classes in the game that actually have some solid things. So, I am going to rant a little bit about some minor nitpicks, but not necessarily reworks. So, when we talk about Barbarian, Barbarian has 4. One side note on Sorceress I should mention. I know it's... Okay. There is no key passive to help a Talrasha's style build. That's something I have a slight problem with. Because I think that there is definitely value in a Talrasha's style build. But the fact that you can't keep all of those bonuses up relatively consistently, in my opinion, is kind of problematic. So that's why, part of the reason why I say, hey, there should be a key passive that helps Talrasha's out. You could have one that helps Talrasha's, and you could have another one for the Conjuration Tree. Because there's things around the Conjuration Tree. There's supposed to be a Conjuration build, because there's a lot of support for a Conjuration build, but it doesn't exist. Anyway, side tangent over. Apologies. Looking at Barbarian. Barbarian has 3, and they're very situational build to build to build. Now, obviously, you do have to build around these a little bit. So, let me clarify what I mean by this. The best... You're always going to be building around one of these. It's never like, oh, I'm going to pick the one that best suits me. And let me explain why. If you're running a Red Ring of Fever build, this is a build that requires you to spend 100 Fury within 3 seconds. Then you're going to run Unbridled Rage. Because Unbridled Rage gives you a massive increase in damage, but it also gives you a massive increase in Fury cost. What this does is it doubles all of your Fury costs. Double Swing goes to 50, Upheaval goes to 80, Hoda goes to 70, Whirlwind goes to 50 per second, and Rend goes to 75. Now, this is mandatory for Red Ring of Feather builds. Most builds that run Death Blow, Hoda, and Upheaval are running them. And if you're running Hoda or Upheaval, almost every Hoda build is running Unbridled Rage. Most Upheavals are running Unbridled Rage. There's a few that run Walking Arsenal because they have tech options for it, like the Call of the Ancients version of it. So that's just an FYI. My thing is that I don't think this perk needs any more of a rework. I think this is fun. Gushing Wounds. Causing an enemy to bleed, you have a chance equal to your critical strike chance to increase the bleeding amount by 115% of your critical strike damage bonus. Overpowering a bleeding enemy creates an explosion that inflicts 70% bleeding damage over 5 seconds. This is designed to play around with bleeding builds. All bleeding builds use your slashing weapons, whether that's one-handed slashers or two-handed slashers. Because of that, slashers have critical strike chance. It's definitely supposed to synergize with things like Rupture, with things like Tough as Nails for bleeding thorns, things like Rend, things like Flay. Because of this, this is pretty good. I also think that this is generically good in some builds, just because of the fact that it does give you an extra damage if you're running bleed. If you're running any type of thorns, and so you're running Tough as Nails and Outbursts, which are okay, you can get a decent amount of damage off of that. Just off of the crit bleed and the overpower bleed. I don't think that needs a rework. Maybe you make it more direct to bleeding damage, similar to how Combustion works for the fire side, where it's like each individual source of bleeding you have increases the total amount of bleeding by X amount. That could work too. But most bleed builds anyways are just running Rupture anyways. Just bleed, bleed, Rupture, pull. So, Berserking and Walking Arsenal are the two I want to talk about. Walking Arsenal really requires you to plan the build out. The way it works is that you have to activate damage with your two-handed bludgeoning, two-handed slashing, and your dual-wielded weapons. You get 10% increased damage for each type that you deal. Then, you get an additional 15% bonus if all three types are active. But the buffs only last for 8 seconds per type, meaning you constantly have to rotate between resetting these in order to maintain the maximum benefit. This requires a lot of planning. If you're looking at, okay, well, what skills are the best for dual wielding? For the dual wield, well, you have Frenzy, you have Double Swing, everything else kind of sucks, okay? What's the best build for slashing weapons? Obviously, you have the bleed ones, right? But you can also run Whirlwind, you can run Lunge, you can run Upheaval, you can run Leap, you can run Death Blow. You have to do so much planning for what only comes out to a 25% damage bonus that you have to maintain. It's really not that worth it. But remember, you're constantly having to rotate between these. And then you need 100,000 steps in order to really help, which means you now have to run Ground Stomp. So you have to run 3 skills that deal 3 different types of damage, plus Ground Stomp. It really takes away a lot of the versatility you have. However, I don't think you need to fix Walking Arsenal by changing this. I think you fix it with either a legendary or a unique. To me, the easiest thing you can do if you want to fix Walking Arsenal is very simple. Add a one-handed weapon that states skills using this weapon count towards all 3 damage types for the Walking Arsenal key passive. That is the simplest fix in the entire game to make Walking Arsenal easier. Because you have to understand, it's a 25% bonus. That's not very good. And you could say, well, you could just make, you know, a Frenzy build around it and use that. Frenzy builds want to use Berserking. They want to use Unconstrained. So, that would be an interesting choice, actually. If it's like, okay, so like, I can make a Frenzy build that gives me a permanent 25% damage bonus, or I could run Berserking, which is an overall better skill. I'm fine with it. That's something that's an easy fix. Another fix you could do that's in a similar vein would be to run something like a legendary where kills with a Walking Arsenal with a weapon increase its active duration by X amount of seconds. I wouldn't say by 8 seconds, I would say by 4 seconds. So basically, if you get a kill with a Walking Arsenal weapon, it adds 4 seconds to the timer for you. That could be something you could buff it up. I don't think the key passive itself needs a buff. I think it needs some support around it to buff it. Because it really is the most lackluster of the options. Berserking I don't have a problem with. I just want to state, I think that Berserking has one line of text you can replace, and then I have one minor complaint. So let's look. Increase Berserking's maximum duration by 5 seconds. Okay. That's fine. Here's the problem I have with that. That increases the maximum duration up to 10 seconds. But it doesn't change the actual durations, right? If I hit Fighter Steel Grasp right here, damaging an enemy, I gain Berserking for 2 seconds. What happens? It doesn't go up to 7 seconds. It stays at 2 seconds. Death Blow. Berserking for 3 seconds. It doesn't go up to 8 seconds. It stays at 3. It just increases the amount of Berserking I can have at one time. Meaning, if I were to use Steel Grasp and then Death Blow, that's 5 seconds. I don't have an increased duration. But if I then run a Brawling skill, that's another 3 seconds. Without that key passive, the duration won't get extended. With the key passive, I will get my full 8 seconds. Okay, here's my problem with that. Very big problem that I have with that. Why doesn't it just increase all Berserking durations by 2 or 3 seconds each, right? So instead of increasing the maximum duration by 5 seconds, why doesn't it just increase all Berserking durations by 3 seconds? This goes to 5 seconds. This goes to 6 seconds. This would now go to 6 seconds, right? Something like that. Now, the other pet peeve that I have with Berserking is just how you trigger Berserking. There's no real great ways to trigger Berserking. Most Barbarian builds are basic skill as a fallback option, core skill that's a main source of damage, triple shout, and then either Wrath of the Berserker or Iron Skin. That's the majority of Berserker builds in the game. I don't like that. Here's the thing. What grants you Berserking? Frenzy has Battle Frenzy, which is while Berserking your other skills gain attack speed. But it doesn't give you Berserking. I think Bash has anything. I think Lunge has. Here we go. Critical strikes with Lunging Strike grant you Berserking for 1.5 seconds. Okay, so Lunging Strike gives you Berserking, potentially. Whirlwind doesn't have anything. Hoda doesn't have anything. Upheaval has something. If Upheaval damages a boss, at least 2 enemies are a boss, you gain Berserking for 2 seconds, increased to 3 seconds if it damages at least 4 enemies. This one is an extender. This doesn't create it, right? Yeah, casting Double Swing while Berserking grants 2 additional seconds of Berserking. This doesn't have anything for 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 Berserking. What's the other passive? This doesn't have anything for Berserking, but you can trigger it with a passive. Warcry gives you Berserking for 4 seconds. Okay? So we have Lunging Strike, Upheaval, Warcry. And a passive. These two don't because they're triggered with the passive as well. Death Blow and Steel Grasp can give you Berserking. Rupture I don't think can. Yeah, Rupture doesn't. Call doesn't. Maelstrom doesn't. And then Wrath of Berserker. You have 7 skills that can give you Berserking. 7. That is not very good. But it is what it is. Two more classes to go and the video's run on a little longer than I'd like it to. Okay. Minions, I'm just gonna tell you right now as we're loading in. The minion one is definitely the one. You're really gonna cut me off here, game? Thank you. Still have one more of these to do. I don't cover rogue, so. Alright. So, let's take a look now at Necromancer. Necromancer, you already know who the winner is. Let's knock out the basics, though. Ossified Essence, which is bone skills, deal 0.5% increased damage for each point of essence you have above 50 upon cast. So let's say you start at 100. That means that you will get a 25% increased damage bonus for your cast. 25% damage bonus to Bone Spear is pretty good. Obviously, there's other ways you can buff that out. There's another thing that you have for Ossified Essence. That's for the legendary aspect that ties to it. I think Ossified Essence is fine. Next, we have Rathma's Vigor. I do miss Rathma's Vigor having that 10% health bonus on it. Just saying, Blizzard, please. Can I have that back? Thanks. I think it's okay, though. After being healthy for 12 seconds, your next blood skill will overpower. This timer gets reduced by 2 seconds each time blood orbs heal or overheal you for a certain amount of life. Now, that amount of life that you need to heal or overheal with is done by consuming blood orbs. That is easier to do on a Blood Lance build, by the way, than it is on a Blood Surge build, but either way, it's okay. It's a reliable way to give you an extra overpower and to continue having more reliable extra overpowers. I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Shadow Blight. Shadow damage infects enemies with Shadow Blight for 2 seconds. Every 10th time an enemy receives shadow damage from you or your minions, they're affected by Shadow Blight, and they will take an additional 22% shadow damage. So it basically adds a little bit of damage to Shadow Blight. Shadow Blight's damage is increased by 100% of your Shadow damage over time bonus. So what this means is that 22% is increased by whatever Shadow damage over time that you have. So basically every 10 hits you get a nuke on a damage over time effect, which is very good. Then there's Kalen's Edict, which is just dog shit. If you have not taken damage in the last 2 seconds, your minions get 15% additive attack speed, not multiplicative, additive attack speed, which is completely worthless. While you have at least 7 minions, now that's easy on a summoner build, this bonus is doubled, so 30% additive bonus. There's a skill right here. While you have been healthy for at least 2 seconds, you and your minions get 4, 8, 12% attack speed. And that is still better than this. Even though it costs 3 skill points, and it's a lower bonus, it's still better. Why? Because it's healthy, which means I just need to be above 80% health. Whereas this one requires me to not take any damage, and it benefits me, not just my minions. Now, to be fair, both of these are completely useless compared to Aspect of Frenzy Dead. Each time one of your summoning minions damages an enemy, they get 10 to 14% attack speed for 3 seconds, up to 30 to 42%. So essentially, if they damage somebody 3 times, they get a massive attack speed bonus. And even that's not as good. But, I mean, you're still gonna run it. So that's the thing. What do we do to fix Kalen's Edict? How do we make this better? The obvious answer to me is that this is supposed to buff summoning. Now, the Paragon board unfortunately does it better, because you have something like Hulking Monstrosity in there. You have Cult Leader. Cult Leader would be my #1 nominee right there. I mean, that's just 45% multiplicative bonus damage for having all 3 minion types up, which you're going to have up in a summoner build, right? What's the thing I would rework Kalen's Edict to? To me, there's a couple of routes you could go. The most abstract of these would be to synergize each one of these, right? So if you look, you have Shadow, Cold, and Bone. You have Bone, Blood, and Iron. Make Iron into Shadow, or make Iron into Cold, and Blood goes into Shadow, or Blood, you know, something like that, right? Same thing. Reapers go into Shadow, Defenders can go into, say, Cold, Skirmishers go into Bone, something like that. Synergize all 3 of those together, and make it to where, if you have all 3 minions of the same type active, your minions gain the effect of whatever key passive would normally be tied to this slot. Not you, your minions. So, for example, if you run Bone Mages, Bone Golem, Bone Warriors, your minions gain increased damage per point of essence you have above 50. That's an easy fix. Let's say you have Blood Golem, Blood Warrior, Blood Mage. Your minions will attacks overpower every 12 seconds. This timer is reduced by 2 seconds each time Blood Orbs overheal your minions. Right? You have Shadow Mage, Shadow Golem, Shadow Warrior. Shadow Blight's effect, it still applies to minions and stuff, but you can make it to where Shadow Blight, like, procs more consistently. See what I'm getting at? That's the most outlandish one. That's not going to happen. A better fix to me is that minions deal stacking damage on an enemy. So let's say each time a minion hits a boss, it deals 1% bonus damage to that boss up to a certain cap, say 20%. If any minion dies to a boss or an enemy, you lose all your bonus. You lose all of the bonus. Right? That's something you could do. Army of the Dead to me is an interesting synergy, because Army of the Dead kind of sucks. Prime Army of the Dead, they have a chance to leave behind corpse, they raise your warriors and mages. Something that you could maybe do is each time a minion is summoned, they get damage immunity for 2 seconds while being summoned. Or each time a minion dies, they explode in a damage, dealing 10% of the health that they had while they were alive. There's so many different things you could do than just this, because that is just not worth it. Alright, lastly we have the Druid. I mean, I don't even think that's a good fix. I don't even think that would be a good enough fix to just buff, say, Kalen's Edict, like I did with Walking Arsenal, where you can buff Walking Arsenal by just having a unique and or a legendary tied to it. I don't think you can fix Kalen's Edict with a legendary or a unique. I don't think there's a strong enough buff you could give it besides just reworking.
Hi.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish this video with Druid. Come on, game. Don't make me release a standalone video just for fucking Druid. Okay, they're going to make me release a standalone video just for Druid. Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you, game.